I was going to Wits to study architecture, and my father sadly passed on. And my mother and I were left with my mother and I. We were sitting in the kitchen one day, and she said, "You better get a job." I said, "Yeah, I better get a job. I'm getting bored." So we looked in the Star, and we saw a little, in the Smalls, laboratory assistant required. Sounded good. They wanted a laboratory assistant in the negative developing, as in your case. And I had to go and see Mr. Jaime Kirstein. And Mr. Jaime Kirstein, who is a most decent chap, actually, and he interviewed me, and he said, "Well, what school did you go to?" And I told him, "I went to King Edward's School just up the road here." And he said, "Oh, that'll do. You know, that's fair enough. What else can you do?" He eventually signed. He said, "Yes, okay, you're good enough." I found out why afterwards, because the laboratories was like the bottom end of the lot and the bottom end of the whole studio. Everybody started in the labs. And I went into the labs and I made innumerable mistakes. Overexposed, got wrong lights, did all the rest of it and so forth. They all put up with me until I had to print 52 commercials. And I screwed up on quite a lot, and stock cost money, and everybody hated me for a bit. Anyway, they all got over that. Kalani Film Studios was one of the oldest film studios in the world. There's one older, it's in Copenhagen, it's called Nordisk Film. Now, somebody in their genius pulled down an historic building, Kalani Film Studios, to build a rather cheap and nasty Kalani Mall, which is hardly a replacement for a studio that had been running since 1911 and did the first sound movies in South Africa, and they did the Voortrekkers, they did the Zulus, they did all sorts of things, all of which are in archives at the moment, and you can retrieve them because they're on film, not on a digital format. However, I got tired of being bombarded because I was not very good in the labs, and I made a few mistakes. Anyway, you had to go out and get your box of perfs. So I went out naively and spoke to a lot of people out there, Richard van Lingen being one of them, and Barney Joffe being another, because they were editors, and that's where the perforations were. And eventually they said no. And I went into Jaime's office and said, "Mr. Kirstein, sir, I need a box of perforations. Where do I get them?" And so that was my introduction to this whole thing. And by this time, I got quite into film. The actual feel, the smell of the hypo, the developers, the whole ambiance. We worked in a red light condition because that is not for printing of film. So one of the jokes was to write the printing cards with red pencil. Of course, you can't read it. So when you get in there, Fundamental Muller used to get the language I will not use on the show. And lo and behold, he chased me out, and I left and went to see Mr. Kirstein. I said, "Listen, I've had enough of this lot. I want to become a camera person." He said, "No, you can't. You've got to." I said, "That's it. I want it." And he said, "Oh, I see what I can do." And then we got Johnny Brown in, Peter Lang, and a bunch of other guys. Raymond Hancock, whose nickname was Straal Handpil, for what it's worth, just a piece of record. And lo and behold, they said, "Okay, we'll give him a break." They gave me an IMO. I've still got that IMO today. And off we went, and we started shooting all sorts of things. Cricket. We used to go to the cricket, and Johnny Brown was the big camera on a Mitchell camera, 1,000-foot loads. But instead of putting 1,000-feet loads in the magazine, we used to put, there were two in the magazine, 2 magazines in the box. We used to leave one magazine downstairs and put beer in the other one. And we used to climb up at the Wanderers. It was a good couple of 100 feet up, and pull all this lot up and spend the day up there, sandwiches and beer. I mean, you can't do better in the camera department than that. Anyway, I got tired of, I did a lot of pictures there. We did some Jamie Ace pictures. We did Al Debo and Frikkie Burgers, where I made a big boo-boo on as well. Johnny Brown was the director of photography on that, in the army base in down in the Free State, and I got through that somehow or other reasonably well. Now, not Johnny Brown, Peter Lang. Peter Lang's father-in-law was Jeff Unsworth. Jeff Unsworth shot Cabaret and many other pictures and won 3 Oscars. And unfortunately, he's now part of the past. He's shooting in the big studio in the sky. And lo and behold, I got all his addresses, and I went to England in 1954. And actually, I'm still theoretically living in London. And that's 40 odd years now. And that's where I started seriously working on film. I was a clapper loader. My first experience of clapper loading was on a picture called Tom Thumb. And lo and behold, I was so diligent making the clapper boards used to be written in chalk on black. And I made sure that 64 take 7 was perfect. And they said, okay, number, the usual standard stuff. And I went out and I did clap, and the snow fell from the ceiling off this thing, right down over this lovely lady's boobs, basically. And of course, the whole studio fell apart at the time. And the first assistant director, called Johnny Ray, said, okay, let's start again. So that's sort of where we got the kick-off. But I worked with a lot of people in big studios learning the disciplines, which we do not have today. Now, sooner or later, they're going to ask me, what do I think of the film industry today? The film industry is less articulate today than it was in 1935 when they made the Voortrekkers and other major pictures at Killarney. And it's a pity because somehow the disciplines are lost. And we are SASC members, a society that I'm very proud to belong to. And one of the things is, why don't we get more people of other persuasions in? And the reason for that is that there are no people with other persuasions who can physically do the job up to a reasonable and good standard. And we are working at standards now of excellence and perfection. I worked with Liz Taylor on a picture once, and she would only be photographed from one side. After her second whiskey and whatever it was, a crème de menthe that she used to drink, on a picture called, what was it called? It was called, anyway, I'll think about that later. And so I learned that you don't go in there and say, yeah, Liz, move over to the left a bit. She'd get all twitchy and go and sit in the back of a Rolls Royce drinking brandy and vin de menthe, or crème de menthe, whatever it was, with Richard Burton. It's called the film business. Not for nothing, because it is business. The picture has to make money. There are no egos involved. But lighting is a very subtle thing inasmuch as you have to be able to mold the lighting so that you have the definition and, of course, light in the eyes so that you can see the sparkle. Emil Nofel had just gone on his own. He was working for Jamie Ace, got the essence of South Africa out of people. But South Africa is not the only place on the earth. We must make more pictures in South Africa that demonstrate South Africa through an international ability to be able to show those pictures and people wanting to see them. It's not just being a color or whatever it is. It's being creative and having ability. Anyway, when I first got back here, there were no things like flags. Flag on stand. Now, I'll give you a demonstration. There's a light over there. A flag you put there and it takes a bit of the light off my face. And it sometimes is good, it sometimes is better without the flag. So we brought in flags. Dollies, tracks were here, but they weren't used. Nobody knew how to use them. So I built a dolly that could track in all directions. A proper dolly can go forwards and then sideways and down, because sometimes you track not on tracks but on a flat form, and you could track around things and drive into things and get nice feelings and nice movements of things. None of that existed. So I had all these things made. People just used to put light on things. Now, as in today, we have a nice soft scrim, softening the light and making it more acceptable. You can also put a partial 85 or a partial something else just to warm the light up for certain things. Jan Straitenbach, who did some very fine work, not a particularly nice person to work with, but was very intelligent and a worthwhile filmmaker. He learned how to make films. When I was lecturing at Wits, they used to come and say, should I do my honours degree? I said, the best way of doing your honours degree is to go out and get a job in the film industry. And then you will learn probably more in the first 3 or 4 weeks out there than I can teach you here, because you're only hearing what I'm saying, but you're not listening to what I am saying. And there's a discipline in the film industry which must be maintained. Very strong discipline. You can't have an ego. Egos are out. The best people I've worked with, like Elizabeth Taylor. Roger Moore was the most humble guy in the business. He used to come and play football with us at lunchtime. And I've got some photographs at home. It was a comic. He used to draw things on the tracking boards he liked South Africans very much indeed, because in those days there was conscription, and conscription used to take people out to far reaches of the empire where they were in the army for 6 months. And he was conscripted, and he met a bunch of South Africans. He said the only people that didn't moan and got on and did with the job were the South Africans. So we became very good friends. We still are very good friends. I saw him about 6 months ago in the Pinewood front officer's passage. And he said, Vincent, are you still pulling focus? I said, no, I've got past that. And Pat Berman, who's Monty Berman's wife, I bumped into in the cinema in London. She saw me and came home and said hello. Very gratifying to have these older people remember you and come and say hello. So one must be humble and gentle in this industry, as well as being aggressive and a good filmmaker. Oh, I worked on a picture called Hotel Rwanda, where I directed and photographed all the action. And one of the directors was a Irishman called Terry George. We were talking about him last night. That's why he comes to mind, first of all. Then there's people like Don Chaffee, who did Blackfriars Dog, and he did a lot of Hammer pictures. I was a Hammer boy. I used to work on Hammer pictures with Michael Carreras and Sir John Carreras, and they did all those Hammer horrors. And some of them were good pictures, some of them weren't very good pictures. Anyway, I worked on a picture called Creatures the World Forgot in Namibia, and another picture called On the Buses around Borehamwood in the UK. And then another Hammer picture in LA. That was a part of it, actually. I'd have to do the whole thing because of the immigration laws into... Mr. Trump is probably very gleeful at the moment, as far as I know, because you can't get into the States anymore. Anyway, there's Don Chaffee, oh gosh, hundreds of them. There's a chap by the name of Guy Green. Guy Green, not the Green I'm thinking of, but Guy Green did Great Expectations. He was a director of photography turned director, and I worked with him on a picture called The Sea of Sand in Libya. In the 60s and 70s, he was very active, and a charming gentleman, sadly demised at the moment, who I met at the ASC at one of their dues. And I went up to him and I said, Guy, do you remember the picture Sea of Sand? And he fell about because it was produced by two gentlemen, Monty Berman and Bob Baker, with whom I worked on The Saint for 4 years with Roger Moore. We did 4 seasons, 13 episodes per season. We used to shoot an episode a week, and in other words, just short of a feature film a week. And we did that for 4 years on a Mitchell camera with this movement that never gave us a minute's trouble. The film industry is not money, it's not glamour. It's hard work and basic satisfaction at the end of the day. And to see a picture, I can show you a picture that I did 40 years ago now, called Katrina. It's very viewable today and very up to speed in terms of politics, because it was one of the first rebellion pictures against the nationalist government, and therefore against the ANC today. And it stood the test of time because love and passion was put into it. And Emil Nofel, for whom we made this picture, who was the producer, was a very passionate person, an ex-Kalani editor, by the way. Zulu Dawn, my goodness, Barry Sinclair, a very notable producer. We went down to Mnutu, which is near Babanango, for Dougie Hickox was the director. I had worked with Dougie Hickox on other pictures prior to this, and they called him the Cunane because he used to wobble his nose. He was a very strange gentleman, but talented, obviously. Now, we worked 22 weeks on that picture. We shot over 1 million feet of film out on the site where the Zulu Dawn took place, which is quite airy, incidentally. It's got a mystique about it because where the people dropped, they buried them. And there's just white stones there today. And it's emotional because the Zulus came over the hill. The English medical department was there. Cog Hill moved out, and he went with taking the colours to Rorke's Drift, where all these Victoria Crosses won. More Victoria Crosses were won there than anywhere else at any other time in history. And the Zulus, when they left, said, "Umkhosi." Very emotional. Makes me feel quite upset that it's so noble an effort in killing. Anyway, they managed to get through the thing. But the picture was moderately tedious because Ozzy Rawi was the director of photography. I was hired as the second unit director, but actually became the second camera on the first unit. Ronnie Taylor was the first unit cameraman. Now, operating a camera and lighting are quite different things, because in the English system, the director refers to the operator. In the American system, he refers to the director of photography and tells them what to do. So the difference is subtle but quite immense. The picture was very difficult to make because we had, I think it was 5,000 Zulu chaps on a hill that came down to attack the Brits. History goes that they couldn't open the ammunition because they'd soldered the tins too well, and they used 303 and 45-75 Martini Henry ammunition, but they couldn't get it, so they were overrun by the Zulus, and therefore they retreated to this rather remote place called Rorke's where it all happened. And there was immense bravery from the Zulus and from the Brits relative to the whole encounter. And they had redoubts, which are little clumps of people who stood their ground. And they were overrun by the Zulus, who had the Inhlaba, which was the stabbing spear, which has got an end so that when you stabbed in, you could pull it out again. And all of these things we had to try and reproduce. But Dougie didn't know too much about Zulu history and Zulu people. He didn't even know Kunja and Welugai. It's not Zulu, by the way, that's Sesotho. And he, I believe, although he did a very good job, and it's a nice picture, I saw it the other day, I was quite proud of what we saw. But it was heavy going. But as I was saying, we had fun. We all retired to the bar, which they had bought to this little town called Gnutu, and we all sat and drank beer and talked rubbish. And some people had the habit of drinking all night and going on set the next day. It was fun, yes. We had enormous fun. I met my wife on that picture, for which I'm truly thankful, because I'm still married to her, would you believe? Right, Zulu Dawn. There's the SASC, the BSc, and of course the ASC. And this was run by the ASC, and they wanted everybody to get together, the various societies, the South African Society, the Dutch Society, the Australian, the New Zealand, the Indonesian, all of them. We were all there. And I'm very proud to say that Dwayne got skippies to make up a disc from random material that the members had actually shot. And that was shown to people to sort of introduce you as a society. And I've got to tell you, ours was the best. It was better than the British one and far better than the American one. And there's a gentleman there working for the ASC who's a South African chap, Brett. And Brett came up to me afterwards and said, "My goodness, that was bloody good, wasn't it?" I said, "Yes." It was made by the SASC. And We were admired and have been accepted ever since into the ASC because we deserve it, because we have a place on this planet of excellence and we strive for excellence. And new members must please remember that you are best and good, and we can't ingest anybody who hasn't got the right standards into what I consider to be one of the best societies in the world. So I've been a member of the ASC for 35 years, and you get tired of those old faces. But they're not young people. People tend to use young people in South Africa. When the proverbial hits the fan, they don't know what to do. I worked with James Wong Howe on a picture called The Molly Maguires, primarily because my girlfriend at the time played the lead female role, gorgeous lady. And James was 85 at the time. And James put every ounce of his energy into it. A lot of it was all lighting down in the mine. The Molly Maguires were in the miners. And he, in actual fact, pulled that picture off and won an Oscar for Best Cinematography for that picture. The film industry has now become less than it was 20 years ago. I would like to see everybody else try and rise to the occasion. I worked with a young fellow from film school who really did think he was the bee's knees. He asked me what I'd done. I told him. Then I asked him what he'd done. He said, I've done documentaries and a couple of feature films. Now, he'd only been out of film school for 2 years. Now, a couple of feature films in 2 years is more than anybody else on the planet can do. So we have an attitude which I don't believe is doing the industry any good at all. I would like to see more black people up there fighting the good fight with the rest of us, with the same attitudes of excellence as we have. You want the attitude of it does matter, and if I've made a mistake, how do I fix it, and what are See, there's no problems in this industry. There are only solutions, and I like the solutions myself.